talking about this whole idea of kindness, and specifically a kind and gracious warrior. Our culture has a funny kind of understanding of this word kindness. I think a lot of times when we think kindness, a lot of times we have this idea in our head of, I don't know about you, but you know, think of Mr. Rogers. Like, man, it's like just a nice guy. Like, oh man, that's kind of the grandpa you want to have. Like, man, he probably has like butterscotches in his pocket or something he hands out to you. You know, like hard candy. You're like, that's great. And it's just sweet. I love that. And I think also right now our culture really doesn't understand what that word really means for a number of reasons. But if you think I'm lying to you about that, just look at any political blog that's out there and just read the comment sections. Like, seriously. Or maybe just Facebook. I mean, you don't have to go to the actual blog. Just read Facebook and read comments and just see how absolutely terrible people can be to people that they don't even know. I mean, just like the worst things ever they'll say, hiding behind the guys of their computer screen, and they can say the most terrible things because they have this anonymity in front of their computer. It just like boggles the mind. And I think part of that is because we don't quite understand this idea of true kindness, biblical kindness, that's centered from this source of the gospel of what Jesus has done for us. Here's what I mean. Going back to that Mr. Rogers idea, I think a lot of us picture being nice as just not saying anything offensive. Being nice, not saying anything offensive. But the truth of the matter is, like, that's not really all the time nice. Imagine if you had cancer and you walked into your doctor and the doctor's like, man, I'm going to be nice. I don't want to offend this person. They have cancer. I don't want to tell them that. That would not be a good doctor. That would be a bad doctor. And so niceness is not just not saying anything not offensive. We're going to get to this whole idea of biblical kindness. What did Jesus do for us? We just sang about it. Jesus looked out at all of humanity and saw all the things that humanity had done against him. We sinned against him. We offended him greatly. He created this law and created this beautiful place for us to live. And what do? We just totally say, God, I don't care about your law. I don't care about your way. I'm going to do things my way. So you can take that. I'm going to do my own thing, and I don't really care. Making ourselves enemies of the Lord Most High. We're no longer friends here. And some of the times we forget that, or maybe we don't understand the nature of our relationship with God, that we're really just good people. We're not good people. We're bad people. And we deserve his punishment. But instead of that, here's what God does. He looks down on his humanity that he's created and seeing all the evil that they've done and says, in spite of all that, I'm going to come after you, to pursue you, to love you, to pay your punishment on the cross, and I'm going to redeem you and restore you and bring you a part of my family. This is what real kindness looks like. That's sacrificial, that's selfless, that looks at those that can't bring anything back in return and says, you know what, I'm going to give even though I'm not going to get anything back. That's what real kindness looks like. And today we're going to look at this story of David that it's just really interesting because I see a lot of parallels in the gospel that come through just in the story of David. And so we're in 1 Samuel chapter 9. We're kind of in this, or 2 Samuel chapter 9. And kind of continuing our series here. And a lot of what we've been talking about is kind of David's victories, his exploits in war, and a lot of good redeeming qualities that David does. And again, this is not just a story about David. As we've talked about, it's a story of God and God's greater picture of what he's doing to redeem his people for himself, and how God is actively at work and involved in our everyday lives. And we'll see in a couple chapters, we're going to get to a pretty significant chapter of David's life. Doesn't go so well for him, and a lot of just really bad decisions he makes. But we see here, again, because David's a human being, he's a person. We're going to talk about some of that today. So 2 Samuel chapter 9, let's look down into verse 1. And David said, is there still anyone left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba, and they called him to David. And the king said to him, are you Ziba? And he said, I am your servant. And the king said, is there not still someone of the house of Saul that I may show the kindness of God to him? Ziba said to the king, there is still a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in his feet. The king said to him, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, He is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, at Lo-debar. And the king sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, at Lo-debar. And Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and paid homage. And David said, Mephibosheth, and he answered, Behold, I am your servant. And David said to him, Do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. And I will restore to you all the land of Saul your father, and you shall eat at my table always. And he paid homage and said, What is your servant, that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I? Then the king called Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, All that belonged to Saul and to all his house I have given to your master's grandson. And you and your sons and your servants shall till the land for him, and shall bring in the produce, that your master's grandson may have bread to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall always eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. And then Ziba said to the king, According to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so will your servant do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah. And all who lived in Ziba's house became Mephibosheth's servants. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate always at the king's table. Now he was lame in both his feet. So here's a little context in the story. Again, you had this Saul, who was the former king of Israel. David was his trusted bodyguard. At one point in their lives, David was killing more people, more enemies than Saul was, and people were talking about, Saul kills his thousands, David kills his tens of thousands. Talking about David's really the one doing it, and Saul's getting jealous. So Saul comes after David. David's done nothing wrong but protect his king. Saul comes after David. David's in this period of time in the wilderness where he's running from his previous master and king. And eventually, God tells Saul, your kingdom is going to be taken from you. And at the Mount of Gilboa, Saul dies. But not only Saul, but Saul's son Jonathan dies too. Jonathan was David's best friend and was loyal to David, and at the same time kept his allegiance to Saul, his father. But because of Saul's sin, his father's sin, Jonathan was also killed in the battle. Now, in that same battle, Jonathan had a couple of sons, or at least one son, Mephibosheth, and Mephibosheth's nurse took him and started running away from the battle. And as she ran from the battle, she dropped the baby, and what probably happened is probably a spinal injury, or maybe fell on his feet. We don't really know, but he was crippled in both of his feet. Now, just kind of understanding the whole idea of the spinal cord, and if you injure a certain part of that spinal cord, further down the spinal cord it goes, there's different kinds of injuries that you can take. So maybe this is what happened, but anyways, Mephibosheth is lame, and he is a part of his the old kingdom. So he would have been considered an enemy. Anytime in ancient times when you had a former king, the family that follows oftentimes will be the next king. In fact, when Saul did die, what happened? Saul's one of his sons that survived became king of Israel. And they had this civil war, and David eventually gets the throne back. So David has this period of peace, and he comes and he's asking this question: Is there still anyone left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? For the sake of David and his friendship with Jonathan, he still wanted to show kindness to the house of Saul. Now, this whole idea of intentional kindness. Now, did David have to be kind to Mephibosheth? No. Again, he was a part of the previous administration, and he represented all that was there. What benefit did this offer David militarily? None. I mean, if anything, this is where your previous coup attempts will come from. It's from the old guy's lineage. And yet, David's like, I want to show kindness here for Jonathan's sake. This idea of kindness requires intentionality. I think just in talking about this idea of kindness and biblical kindness and gospel-centered kindness, we have to start at this aspect of we have to be intentional about the way in which we are kind, just like Jesus was kind to us. And what do I mean by that? David went out of his way to show kindness to somebody that he didn't necessarily have to show kindness to the house of Saul. And for us, kindness cannot be haphazard. I think a lot of us, if we're really honest with ourselves, if you're driving in your car and you're going to the stoplight and you see a guy on the side of the road and he's holding a sign that says, hey, can you give some money to me? Or oh, we'll work for food, or hey, can I have some money for some food? A lot of us will see that and we'll go, oh man, I guess I'll give something, here. Maybe we do that because we just don't want to feel guilty about our own conscience because we see something we don't like, doesn't fit within our worldview or our paradigm, and we want to give. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, by the way. But this is not the kind of true kindness that the Bible talks about in this sacrificial selflessness that Jesus demonstrates to us on the cross, and David demonstrates here to Mephibosheth. Kindness must start with intentionality and sacrificial selflessness. It has to start there. That means that we actually have to plan out, looking for ways that we can be blessings to other people. When we understand what Jesus has done for us on the cross, that he has taken you as an enemy of his throne and he has brought you into his family, there is an expectation that we are to live like Jesus and follow in that same model. And that means that he compels us to be kind to other people. But that requires intentionality. That requires that we look outside of our own busy schedules and lives for those around us that we can show compassion on. Now, again, how do we do this? A couple of different ways. One is, the biggest thing, what are the problems that are of brokenness all around us? Well, of course, we see physical problems. Here, Mephibosheth, again, is a guy who's probably marginalized in Israel. Now, David shows kindness to him for Jonathan's sake. We show kindness to other people because of Jesus, but he's this guy that's marginalized. We look for those maybe physical problems, but more than that, spiritual problems. One of the greatest kindnesses that we can show to other people is to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. The life-changing hope that we believe that this message has a power to transform lives and save people and redeem them from brokenness. This is what we do as followers of Jesus. It has to be intentional. The other thing I see here is just really awesome. And we see this what does Mephibosheth do to David here? When David asks for Ziba, and this is an old servant of Saul's house, and he tells him about this guy who's the son of Jonathan. He's asked, where is he? Ziba said to the king, he's in the house of Machir. Okay, David goes over there. Verse 6, David said Mephibosheth, and he said, behold, I am your servant. In fact, he fell on his face and paid homage. Just kind of a really beautiful picture here. Here's a man who, again, has no ability really to take over anything close in the semblance of a throne. He's lame. He can't walk. Again, it's not the day of modern medicine, so there's not things that you can do really to fix that. There's not any kind of spinal surgery that can go along the way and take care of those things. It's amazing just thinking through even for our own daughter and kind of the situation we've been in and all that modern medicine kind of brings about. And even now today, like we're still talking to doctors like we just don't really know. We don't really know. And this is 2018 and there's still like questions of, I thought like doctors would have this stuff kind of figured out by now. Well, they don't. So just imagine thousands of years ago, they definitely didn't. And here's a guy who has no ability to take over the throne. Right? And David comes up to him, and this man is bowing down at his feet, realizing this is the king who could take his life in an instant. And possibly should, because of what other kings around typically do. The second thing we see here is that kindness requires action. Let's look down at verse 7. It says here, and David said to him, do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. And I will restore to you all the land of Saul your father, and you shall eat at my table. Again, I'm sure David sensed the fear of Mephibosheth looking at the king of Israel, who had the power to take him out then and there. And instead of taking him out, David says, don't fear. Here's what I'm going to do. First, verse 7, he says, do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I'm going to show you kindness. I'm going to demonstrate this to you. I'm not just going to give you a platitude. I'm not just going to say a bunch of feel-good speech that make you happy for a moment and then I'll just leave. I'm going to show you kindness. I'm going to demonstrate this to you, and this is how he's going to do it. Verse 7 says, I will restore to you all the land of Saul your father, and you shall eat at my table always. These are really significant, and this is why. Saul, again, the conqueror, or the previous conqueror, had the land, and David coming in as the new conqueror, leader of Israel, who now has all control of the land and owns it. Again, this is a symbol of what he now is in his position of king and of Israel. It belongs to David rightfully. Now, you just think about this. Imagine just the story of Saul and David. David's on the run from Saul. He's done everything to try to preserve his life. He had two opportunities to take his life, and he doesn't do it. I think David's earned that right for that land. Saul did nothing to help continue to pass that on in his lineage. Instead, I think David really did deserve it. He earned it. I think it'd be natural, a human thing for us to see that and go, yes, that should belong to David. But instead, David gives this over to Mephibosheth, all of Saul's former land. And the second thing he says, which is really interesting, and we're going to talk more about this towards the end, he offers him a seat at his table. A seat at his table. Why is that significant? Because this is where the family lives, right? Just think about your own house. You have dinner. Who comes to your table most of the time? You invite friends over, invite family over, yes, but who's at your table most of the time? It's your family. It's a sacred place. That's the people you love the most, you care about the most, who you do anything for the most, are eating with you every night. Here, he invites what could have been a former enemy into his house. This is beautiful. It's restoration. I can't help but just think of this idea of because of Jonathan, David shows kindness to Mephibosheth, and because of Jesus, we're to show kindness to other people. What does Jesus do for us? Again, we're enemies of his throne, and Jesus looks at us and says, you deserve death. You deserve destruction. I'm going to save you and redeem you from that sin, and I'm going to take the penalty and punishment of that on myself. Not only am I going to do that, but I am going to invite you in as my son and my daughter. I'm going to choose you, adopt you, bring you in. You're a part of my family now. He came after us. We didn't come after God. It wasn't as if one day we're like, you know what, I'm going to go after God today. No, God came after us. He saw our plight, our problem as enemies of his throne, and he died on a cross to pay that penalty for us. This is the loving son, loving father. In God, we have this beautiful picture of this story of the gospel where he loved us so much to do this, and then he invites us to a seat at his table. He brings us in as family. David just didn't give Mephibosheth some kind of platitude. He actually showed it with action. I think we live in this day of where it's very easy for us to pretend to be concerned about things that happen in this world. And if you're not convinced of that, again, going back to the social media idea, social media developers are incredibly intelligent in the way in which they establish their platforms. What do? They go and they say, you know what? If we make it so that other people can see that their friends are doing this or liking these pages, you're more likely to like those pages because of your social environment that compels you to do those things. So let's say I remember back in the day, it was Coney. Do you remember that? That was all happening in Africa. And I remember it was like all over Facebook. People are posting their profile pictures, and it's this terrible guy. I mean, absolutely. What he did, terrible. But he would go around and make children soldiers and do all kinds of terrible, terrible things. The world needed to know about what was going on there. But this was happening all the time. And people had talked about it in the past, but most of the time people just ignored it. It wasn't a part of your normal schedule, wasn't a part of your normal routine. But as soon as it popped on Facebook, man, it just went off like a viral hit. Everybody's posting profile pics. Everybody's talking about how terrible this is, as they should. But just saying that something is bad is not action. It's not enough action. It's part of it. It's part of it. I'm not going to deny that awareness is a part of the solution. But that can't be all that we do. We can't just sit around and say, oh, that's terrible. Yes, I agree with you, and then move on with our day as if nothing really happened. Because the truth is, when we do that, when we see the problems and plights of our world and we just sit back on the couch and we like it on Facebook, you're really not doing anything about the situation. You're just doing it so that people around you think that you care about it. Because that's our fallen human heart. That's what we do. We want people to like us, to think well of us, to think that we are good people. But we are sinners. Truth be told, we don't care about what happens around us. We don't care about when people are lost and dying and broken in this world because we still sit at home on our couch. We don't get up and do something about it. The gospel compels us to action. Again, being nice, David wasn't just some friendly guy. This was a man of action. When there was a problem that needed to be solved, he would go after it. Again, he's not perfect. We're going to talk about that in a couple chapters. Sinful man, human being, absolutely. But this is what we're compelled to do. It's compelled to act, compelled to go, compelled to move. It's why we believe in missions. It's why we believe in caring for the least of these. It's why we do things like block parties and do stuff like that in the community, because we want to show love to the people around us and not just say something. Not just pretend that we believe it, but actually do something about it. Because the truth is, it's a lot easier to pretend that you like something and to have your friends think well of you and just sit back at home and do nothing. Kindness requires action. Requires us that we actually do something about the wrongs in the world. What does that look like for us? I mean, I think, again, sharing the gospel, the spiritual problem in the world. I think it's why we do things like church planning, and we care about that. It's why we want to be concerned about, things like those who need to be brought into homes, adoption, foster care. We care about what goes on in the world. It's why we should care about what happens all across internationally, all the terrible travesties and human rights abuses and trafficking and all those things that happen. We should care about that. We should care about those things. Kindness requires action. Thirdly, we see that kindness requires giving with no return. Verse 8, and he paid homage, talking about Mephibosheth, and said, "What is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I?" Here's the thing, back in ancient times, if you weren't physically able to either carry a sword or to farm your land, what good were you in society? I mean, what could you really do? I mean, this is a time and place where you needed to be strong and you needed to be fit. You needed to be able to carry out the duties in which you were assigned to provide for your family, to protect your family, to provide for your country, to protect your country. And Mephibosheth is lame in his feet. This probably would have prevented a lot of those things from going on. David wasn't looking at a man that he could turn into one of his generals. He was looking at a guy that, Mephibosheth says it here, that called himself a dead dog. Mephibosheth thought that he had nothing that he could offer David in return, because he really couldn't. What do you offer the king? What do you offer the king of Israel who your grandfather tried to kill? And you're like one of the last remaining piece of his line. What do you offer a guy like that? You see the humility of Mephibosheth's position before David's. He bows before him and pays homage and says, "How would you show regard to a dead dog such as I?" David shows kindness, or kindness requires giving with no return. I think if you really want to know and see that gospel in action, it's we're giving when we don't receive anything back. What are the reasons we give? What are the reasons why we express kindness? We talked about a few of those. Maybe one is just for the sake of wanting other people around us to think that we're good people. Just terrible motivation. Maybe we just kind of have some personal guilt, like, well, I got to do my part, my piece. Once I do my piece, then I can go home and rest easy knowing that I did something to contribute to this. That's not a really good motivation. If you really want to see where your heart is in kindness, give where you don't expect anything back. I think there's it's interesting, in the South where I'm from, you give something to somebody, you kind of like, okay, It's like, man, you kind of feel in debt to them for a little bit because you're like, oh man, I gotta give something, I gotta do something to give back to them because they gave me this thing, and I gotta help them. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's culture. That's how culture is. And it's still kind, it's nice, it's good. I'm not saying anything wrong with that. But that's not the kind of biblical kindness we're talking about here. This kind of kindness is giving even though you're not receiving. Again, what did Jesus do for us? He gave to his enemies. One of the biggest forms of gospel kindness is giving to bless even our enemies. Now, how does that play out in the grand scheme of things? How do we do that? Again, I don't know all the answers to how we're supposed to handle that or do that well. But being kind to others is giving when you're not getting anything back. No return for your gift. I think also in that, we give, and I think it's good sometimes where we give and we make anonymous gifts where people don't know who you're giving things to. I know of a couple, and there was a random family, and they said, you know what, this couple had some help, and they needed a vehicle. And this other family had a vehicle, and they just gave this other couple a vehicle. A car. They gave them a vehicle. It's like, man, that's a costly gift. That's prized possession. You would do that like for somebody else? Like you just give them something like that? And this couple couldn't give anything back, and this other family didn't want anybody to know that they had done that. And I thought about that and reflected on it. I was like, I just really love that level of kindness, that somebody would think so much of somebody else, that they would give even something so prized as a vehicle for their transportation. Like, that's what the gospel compels us to do. That's the kind of giving that we're supposed to be about, giving where there's no return. And lastly, and I think this may be the hardest one, is kindness does require an invitation to the table. Verse 9. So the king called Ziba, Saul's servant, said to him, so he's already talked to Mephibosheth, told him what he's going to do. Then he talks to Ziba. All that belonged to Saul and all his house, I have given to your master's grandson. So he's making sure he knows the position, the now new arrangement. And you and your sons and your servants shall till the land for him, and shall bring in the produce. So remember, Mephibosheth can't even till his own land. His servants, Ziba and his servants, are going to take care of all of Saul's land for him. That your master's grandson may have bread to eat, but Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall always eat at my table, making sure that he knew where his place was. So Mephibosheth, verse 11, then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands to his servant, so will your servant do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. David not only saw in what could have been a possible enemy of his throne, but he sees in him a man who couldn't give anything back. I'm going to treat you as if you're one of my sons. One of my sons. My kids, and if you're a parent in the room, you understand this, but your kids can do some pretty crazy things. I remember my son walking into his room one time, and he had painted a mural on the wall with magic markers. And if you've ever kind of tried to erase those things, it's not easy to get that stuff off a wall. And he had gone to town. From left to right, it was pretty impressive, the enormity of what he had done. He used different colors. He was going he's practicing some paint. And I'm like, I was ticked off. What are you doing? Come on. But even no matter how mad I get at what he does, or my other kids, what they do, they're still my kids. They're still my sons. They're still my daughters. I still love them unconditionally. They're still a part of my family. Now, I may be mad at them, and if you're a parent, you get that very well, but they're still my children. And again, it's humanly speaking, we realize not all families are like that. You may not be part of a family like that, but biblically speaking, when we belong to Jesus, we're a part of the family. And there is no, you're gone. You're part of my family, now we're going to kick you out. You're a part, you're in. You're one of the sons and daughters of the King. You belong to Jesus Christ. That is a special place to be. We have an invite to the table. And we get all the rights of sons and daughters. And here we are sitting at the King's table, eating with the Lord Jesus Christ. And this is what heaven is like. That we get to commune with Jesus for all eternity. This family. That we all belong to him. And again, we're not physical sons and daughters. He adopts us into his family as sons and daughters. He brings us in, but we are treated as if we've always been there. And this is a beautiful part of the gospel. And in that, this is how we are supposed to treat other people. This is probably the hardest thing, honestly, for us, is treating people as if they're just part of the family. I think as Christians, a lot of times, when it comes to kindness, especially an invite at the table, what does James talk about when he talks about in offering? If you offer a banquet, don't just offer it for the rich people to come into the town, but offer for the people who can't give anything back. Because that's the picture of the church and the gospel, that we have an invite to the table, and we're all sitting at the table, no matter our financial backgrounds, no matter racial backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds. We're all invited to the table. Those who have repented, placed their faith in Christ, I mean, they're in. They're in. Jesus saves them. He redeems them. They're brought into the family, but we have to extend that invitation. Does that mean that people are going to accept it? No, it doesn't. I mean, every day people reject Christ. They reject his good gift. They reject him with all these things that we're offering him. And maybe you have people in your life that you love and you care about, and you've shared with them that beautiful message of the gospel, and they've still rejected it. That will happen. But we still have to keep that invitation open. We have to keep the invitation open. You know, think about what we do to Christ. Think about this just for a second. James chapter 2, verse 10 says, if any man keeps the whole law and yet stumbles in one point, is guilty of breaking it all. So as a follower of Jesus Christ, are you perfect? Do you still break God's holy and righteous law, even as a saved, redeemed follower of Christ? You better say yes, because we do. That's who we are. Just as my kids come into the room and they do what they do and they fight with each other and they yell and they break things and they make murals on the wall and they do all kinds of other things, and poop gets in places I've never even known poop can get in places before, and all that thing that happens with kids, they're still a part of our families. And we as followers of Jesus Christ, we offer those invites to the table. The hard part about that is that as people, as human beings, we're very different from one another. A lot of us, if you're part of a family, and a very close family, and you're honest, you're going to have fights. You're going to have arguments. I don't care how great of a marriage that you have. If it's two fallen people redeemed by Christ or together, you're going to fight. You're going to have arguments. It's just the nature of it. Because we're human beings. And so trying to see how all this plays out together in community, it's difficult. It's tough. But because of Christ, because of what he does through the power of the Holy Spirit, he unites and brings us together. We are always looking to invite other people at the seat at the table so that there are brothers and sisters in Christ. Maybe not our physical brothers. And some of you, I know that, the actual biological family, that doesn't always play out the way that it's supposed to. That you think, man, this is how I thought my family would look, we'd be. Maybe it's brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts, grandparents, fathers, mothers. Doesn't play out the way you want it to. But in the church, the body of Jesus, this is what we're supposed to be. This is who we're supposed to act like, being conformed to Christ. As David showed kindness because of Jonathan, we are supposed to show kindness because of Jesus. Because of what Jesus has given us. Think about what a friend that Jonathan was to David. He warned him when Jonathan's own dad wanted to take David's life. Jonathan told him, man, you got to get out. Dad's going to kill you. Guess who was next in line in the throne? It was Jonathan. Saul was grooming Jonathan to be next in line. That's why he was so upset when Jonathan was turning against Saul and going and siding with David. Jesus gives. He gave so freely to us. We are to give in return. Kindness isn't just about some fake idea of being nice that culture has said you just have a smile on your face that's, okay, yeah, he's got a smile, that's great, and he's courteous and kind to me, and that's good. No, that's not real biblical kindness. Because of Christ, we are to be kind people that are sacrificial, that are selfless, I wish I would tell you story after story, just people I know that even in this body here, who've just shown so much kindness and selflessness, but it would defeat the point to actually share who they were. Because we're doing this because we love Jesus. And that's the motivation. It's not because we're trying to get acclaim or people to think well of us. We do it just because it's the right thing to do. Is that you? Are you a kind person? A kind person, a sacrificial, selfless person? Or is for you, is this so foreign? Like, is this such an idea that you go, I can't do this because you know what? I'm going to get treated bad. I'm going to get treated poorly. You will. If you extend kindness to other people, inevitably they will abuse that. Just like we abuse the grace of Jesus Christ every single day. That's what's going to happen. Is that who you are? And if you're not a follower of Jesus, and this sounds foreign to you, maybe that's where you need to start, of understanding what Jesus has done for you. That he gave up his very blood. He suffered the wrath of God on the cross for you. And he offers you that same type of grace and mercy if you just bow down before him and say, Jesus, I'm a sinner. I desperately need you. Coming before him, he offers that grace fully. There's nothing you can offer him. There's nothing you can give him. There's nothing that you can make it right to fix with the gift that he's given you. He's given you such an amazing gift. There's nothing you can give in return to fix it, to redeem it, to restore it, to bless it. Nothing that you can do. Is that you today? Do you understand biblical kindness? Have you grasped what Jesus has done for you? And then secondly, are you conforming yourself to the image of Christ? That you are a kind person giving in the way that Jesus has compelled us to give.